Magalhael to Stokes, who's onside. 1-0.
Here's Sims. It's a good serve this from Southampton. They could finish the job here. It's Shane Long, and he has done it. Just a minute to play. That's stoppage time. Here's Letizia. Oh, better to say farewell than one of the finest players ever to wear the red and white.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Saints FC podcast. We have reached number 74, and I have a returning special guest. So, those of you who've been listening for a little while may remember last season we spoke to Professor Simon Kemp from the University of Southampton. He's not a professor of football, he's a professor of environmental sustainability, but he is a Southampton season ticket holder, which gives him all the requisite qualifications for speaking on this podcast. Simon, welcome back. How are you?
I'm very well, John. Thank you for inviting me back. I consider it to be an absolute privilege. I would like to just reiterate that even though we are sitting in my office, anything that I say is my personal viewpoint and not the views of the University of Southampton, obviously.
Yeah, we don't want to get in any hot water, do we, about kind of, University of Southampton says Southampton Football Club are rubbish. Anyway, it's probably going to be quite hard to get through this podcast without saying something disparaging about our club, isn't it, Simon?
Yes.
So, last time we spoke on the podcast, it was before the Wolves-Saints game, so we're going back a little while. So I was at the Wolves-Saints game. You were at the Saints-Leicester game.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah,
I don't think I'll ever forget that experience.
Yeah, the fact that both of us are sat here at 7:30 in the morning on the Wednesday probably tells all our listeners that neither of us were at the game last night at Manchester City. I did listen to the commentary and I have seen the Saints goal, which I think was unexpected, so we can talk about that. But I think probably this episode is going to be more about trying to figure out what on earth has gone wrong at our club. I mean, we don't have all that long, but maybe trying to see if there's any glimmers of hope. I think we'll maybe just try and kind of disassemble the whole Southampton Football Club, try and work out what on earth's going on, and then try and pick out some glimmers of hope at the end. So there's something a little bit joyous for our listeners to kind of finish listening to the podcast to. Does that sound even possible, Simon? You're looking at me with a face that says this is going to be a really tough ask.
It is going to be a tough ask because in our line of work around sustainability, you've got to be pretty resilient and have a sense of eternal optimism about yourself, about everything that you do and everything that you look at. And I do consider myself to be an eternal optimist. I'm struggling this one, though. I'm really struggling to try to pick apart. You can normally see some sort of area where you think, well, maybe things could be improved there. There's some element of weakness where everything is revolving around, but I have to be honest, I don't know. And we're sitting here this morning, and it's very strange in that I feel that we're in a situation where I feel relatively thankful that we only lost 3-1, and I can't believe I'm even saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I got to the final score last night and I thought a 3-1 loss to Man City is a massive result on the face of things, which is really, really terrible. Anyway, before we get into Southampton Man City, let's roll back. We're going to go all the way back to Molineux. So, big day for me. So for me, the Wolves Southampton is known in our family as the Albert Hoskins derby. So
brilliant.
Albert Hoskins was my great-grandfather, and he played for Southampton and was manager of Wolverhampton Wanderers. So
wow.
When I was
That's
growing
quite some
up,
heritage.
Yeah. It was basically a choice between Wolves or Southampton, who I supported. So I grew up in Bath, probably pretty much equidistant between Southampton and Wolverhampton. Southampton had Matthew Letizia at the time, and apparently I have some sort of second cousin who also played for Southampton. So that was the real tipping thing. But I do have a soft spot for Wolves, and it was really nice to go to Molineux. It was my first time to Molineux, and so Albert Hoskins derby aside, getting into the game, finished 1-1. probably a fair result, I would say.
From what I saw, but
Yeah.
obviously being there, you get a much better sense for the whole game.
Yeah, and it was an interesting one because Wolves obviously had 2 goals chalked off through VAR, but then they got a penalty which you'd have thought maybe the penalty should have been chalked off through VAR,
Yeah.
but it probably doesn't fall into that clear and obvious thing, and they've not been overruling the refs that much, although that changed last weekend in other matches in the Premier League. And a lot of the Saints fans around me were saying that we were the better side. I was a little bit unconvinced. I thought it was a pretty fair result, 1-1. But getting a draw away from Wolverhampton Wanderers wouldn't necessarily make you quake in your boots for your next home game.
Not at all.
No. And so we're going to come on to this part now because, well, hang on. Before we move on to Southampton-Leicester, right, on the drive up, so my brother was driving, I was working out what my viewing record was watching Southampton.
Yeah. I think a number of people have seen this.
Yeah. I've gone 14 games now watching Southampton in person in the stadium without seeing a victory. I haven't told my wife how much money I've spent between the last time I saw Saints win and well, now, today, this kind of bleak moment where we're looking forward, trying to think, well, when's the next time Southampton's going to win? And should I even go?
I think you should carry on going without question.
Yeah.
Without question. I think it's just one of those horrible coincidences.
Yeah.
Or series of coincidences.
So I wasn't at the game on Friday night. My brother was. He messaged me about partway through the game and said, it could be worse. The man in front of me is sat under a drip, which I thought, it was going to be a miserable experience. But Simon, you were there. So this season you got yourself a season ticket and a season ticket for both of your 2 boys.
Yes.
So they must be delighted with Dad at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, we had season tickets up to a couple of seasons ago. That was just myself and my eldest.
Yeah.
We were lucky to have season tickets through the whole of the Ronald Koeman period, and a little bit afterwards, which wasn't quite so great. We've got season tickets again now, and my youngest is 9 years old, and he suddenly started expressing an interest in football, and we thought, we'll go again. Everything was looking so positive for the start of the season under Ralph. The Ralph Express was rolling. We were well up again onto that, and we got our season tickets, and we went into the whole season with boundless joy and enthusiasm. That's kind of been slightly ground down. This game in particular, I was always saying to Isaac that I absolutely love nighttime matches. They are my favourites. I love the whole. It's completely just the sense of the match, the darkness, the lights, just the atmosphere. I think is just so much more intense, and I love it. And we were lucky. We managed to get into the ground just before the heavens opened, and it was properly hammering down. Some people were coming into the ground, just coming into the match, looking totally bedraggled and looking pretty fed up with life. But again, feeling maybe we're due a good performance, and things, as you say, were looking positive. Coming lead on from the Wolves game. The Wolves game was a step up after the Chelsea match in terms of performance and intensity of performance, and I think everybody was expecting that. They were expecting the intensity because all of the pre-match build-up, Ralph was talking about it, Pierre was talking about it. Everybody, is that whole sense that we were really going to go up them from the off. And I have to be honest, in all the years that I've watched Saints, and we're talking close to 30 years now, I have never had a sense of foreboding quite like just the first few minutes. Because from the first few minutes, you could see that they were completely up for this match, and that we really weren't even remotely. We sat off. When we tried to press, we pressed at exactly the wrong times. We were leaving gaps. When we were trying to double press, we were then leaving holes where the composure of the Leicester players, to be fair, they were brilliant to a man. They just tore through us. And even before we got the first goal against us, I was turning to my boys and I was saying, I've got a really bad feeling about this. I think I messaged you just before the game saying, I've got a good feeling about it. And on the way down, I was thinking, we could get tonked 3-0 here. That's what I was thinking leading into it. But right from the off, it was shocking. just the lack of organisation. And that first goal wasn't a surprise, but it really set the tone for the whole of the rest of the match. And I have to be honest with you, I haven't managed to make myself watch the highlights since I got back from the match. So I don't know about the Bertrand red card. All we saw was there was a real sense of confusion in the stadium. We were going, what red? Checking for red card. It came up on the screens, VAR checking for red card. Thinking, what red card? There's nothing wrong there. And then they showed a very, very quick, rapid flash version of the challenge. And everybody around us was going bonkers, thinking that can't possibly be a red. What was your thoughts on that red card?
It did look like a red.
Right, okay.
Yeah, for me, I thought it looked like a red. I was watching this in Portugal with my dad, so we had the Sky Sports kind of stream coming in, so we did get to see the challenge 20 times over in slow motion. And I think challenges always look much worse in slow motion.
Undoubtedly.
Because, in the heat of the moment, someone could lunge in and not... It could just be a bad challenge without it being malicious.
Yeah.
But then when you slow something down and you see the studs off the ground and it going halfway up the...
It makes it look like a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, it does. It looks like a Jackie Chan sort of a low kick. But it's funny that you had that sense of foreboding before and that you thought we'd lose 3-0, because chatting to my little group of Saints fans on WhatsApp, everyone was kind of predicting, 1-1, Saints 1-0, Saints 2-1.
Okay.
And I was the only one that predicted loss, and I said 4-1. I wasn't anticipating anything like Friday night. What I was anticipating was that we'd probably start quite strongly. Maybe it would be like 1-0, 1-1, 2, and then maybe the floodgates would open a little bit in the second half when we're chasing the game and we'd concede. Because, Leicester were going for second in the table.
Exactly.
They're on a really hot run of form. Their players are really good quality, as we well know. And they've got that forward momentum, whereas I still felt we're on a bit backwards slide. Although the Wolves game was more positive, I still had my doubts. The fact that we conceded 2 goals through VAR. I mean, I know Ralph came out and said that we're defending in a particular way to account for VAR, but...
I'm not sure I buy that.
I don't know if I buy that either. I mean, I think you can do things, so you can probably play a bit tighter on the offside, but ultimately you don't want to be giving away that many really close chances. Because
they are really tiny, fine margins. I can't see how you can plan for margins which are the length of a foot.
Centimetres, yeah, exactly. So I did have a bit of a sense of foreboding. It's interesting that you had it as well. And then when you saw the game start, I mean, the writing wasn't on the wall for 9-0 in the first 10 minutes, but the writing was on the wall for a real tonking. And the way they reacted to the first goal and to the Bertrand sending off, I have never seen a capitulation like that.
Absolutely.
Of any football team, that early on in a game. When Saints beat Sunderland 8-0, it took a little bit of time for the total capitulation of Sunderland. I think
it was only 2 or 3-0 at half-time in that match, wasn't it?
I think it was 3-0. And actually Sunderland had some decent chances in the first half, but it just didn't look like we were going to get anything at all going forward. The players just didn't look up for it. And then, Bertrand gets sent off. And I think this is where, so I guess, my first problem with Saints is that there's not a leader on the pitch.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that Højbjerg is as good a captain as we've had in the past. And you look at the quality of the Saints players. Yes, they're not as good as the Man City players. Yes, they're not as good as the Leicester players. But they're not dreadful players. They're still better players than we've had in the past.
Definitely.
But if you think about in the 90s, when our players were less quality with 1 or 2 exceptions, Jason Dodd was never a cultured football player, really, but he worked bloody hard. And
he was a proper leader on the pitch.
Anything that he lacked in skill or technique, he worked on and improved on and made up for in effort on the pitch. And I cannot believe, I mean, even just with one Jason Dodd or one Franny Benali in the side, we could never have lost 9-0. They just wouldn't have let it happen.
No, I must admit, I absolutely agree, because as much as I had that real sense of dread after the one, I didn't expect it to to go under quite so bad, and it was a lot worse. You expect a reaction at that point. You expect a little bit of, right, okay, we're up against it now. We're down to 10 men. We've got to really work that much harder. But if anything, they seem to work less. It was one of those things, you can't put your finger on it, but it was like generally like the parting of the waves. And when they scored the second, it was at that point, and my eldest will back me up on this, I turned to him and I said, I'm scared now. I really feel that we could be on the end of maybe 10, 11. This could be the all-time record defeat, because they are showing nothing here, and Leicester are absolutely going for the jugular. They are not going to ease off. I can't see them easing off. And it just got worse. Our defenders, there were points where they were running from deep. I mean, Maddison and Tielemans were really dictating the show, particularly Maddison, dropping deeper into that midfield, just picking it up off the defenders, spraying it, making extra runs, making the overlap runs. Our defenders and our midfield were just backing off. I honestly felt that we did not have a midfield. I've never seen Romeo go missing that much. Højbjerg, WardProwse, the three of them, they looked like they weren't even there. But it was genuinely remarkable to see the naivety as well. And Valerie, bless him, I mean, I think he's taken a frightful amount of stick on Twitter over the last week or so. And I don't believe it's fair at all, because he is still, I think we forget sometimes, he's so young. Yes, he's a great attacking fullback, but that's what the modern game is like. This kid has been put into that type of environment where he's been switched over early on in the match, and he's then having to cope with these blistering runs from Perez and Vardy, and he's all over the place. I was really worried. I think I said to you in an email yesterday or something that I hope that Ralph actually rested most of the team for the Man City game last night, because I wanted them taking up the firing line. I was worried about them as human beings after that performance, because it can't be nice.
I mean, how you recover from that? Jan Varry is an interesting point, because he did have a dreadful game on Friday.
Really did, yeah.
But everyone did. But that's, you're right. Valerie is a really young player, and that is where, if you have a leader on the pitch,
exactly.
If you have Klaus Lundekvam or Virgil van Dijk or Jose Fonte, they get that player. They look them in the eye. They hold their shoulder, say, "Look, come on, focus. You can do this. Just watch your man. Just watch the ball. Like, make sure that you're not doing anything." They can snap you out of that. And all of the Saints players were in this kind of like this daze.
You're right. It's like watching a punch-drunk boxer, but there were 10 of them on there.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have necessarily seen it in the stadium, but I think they had a close-up on James Ward-Prowse after the second or third goal. And you can see his head had dropped, and he just looked clueless. He already looked a bit vacant, like as in like, oh no, this is really true. It may have actually been after the first goal, but you could see at that point that he'd already given up. And you can't give up that early on in a game, because, well, that happens. And I think it's interesting about you saying the midfield going missing, because they normally anything that comes through the middle, Romeo and Højbjerg will deal with it. But what Leicester were doing really well was switching the play from left to right. And I don't know, was it? It was like Barnes and Chilwell. Who were kind of the two attacking wingers for Leicester, or wing backs. And the way that they were switching the play, just, we'd have the Hassel would move to one side of the pitch, then Harvey Barnes would switch it over to Ben Chilwell, and suddenly he had the whole pitch to play with.
And there were huge areas of space every time.
Massive. And that's a little bit of worry. I don't think you can put 9-0 down to tactics, but it does show a potential flaw, that if you have wing-backs who can play these brilliant 40, 50-yard passes across the pitch and find the other player, that is a potential weakness, which Leicester exploited. So, I mean, they exploited us on the tactical side of things.
Yep.
We didn't have a leader on the pitch to actually kind of get us out of the funk of the dazed and confusedness. And I think another problem, which I really noticed on the television, you can imagine how often they cut to Ralph stood on the touchline on his own, looking really lost. And this is probably quite a lot has been said about Danny Roll leaving Southampton. He's the assistant manager. Now, I don't know how much of an influence he had on it, but what it did look like on Friday is that Ralph was there on his own.
Yes.
Kelvin Davis wasn't coming off the bench to speak to him, to talk to him, to provide him with ideas. None of the other backroom staff were coming off the bench to stand next to him, talk to him, bounce ideas off him, suggest a way forward. And he just looked like a guy who was completely on his own, just totally on his own in every sense of the way. And he had nothing or no one to turn to. And that was quite alarming for me.
Yeah, I must confess I didn't pick up on that because our season tickets are we're over in the family area.
Yeah.
So we're in the family area between Kingsland and Chapel, sort of in that corner area. So you don't really pick that up. I think that, and also I got to be honest, there were times where I was so horrified by what I was seeing, I wasn't even looking at the match that much. I was texting a couple of my mates just saying this is like a horror movie. This is just surreal. So I wasn't watching that. I know the times when I was watching it, I was looking at where all the space was, because it seemed to me like the pitch got a huge amount bigger during that game because of what you're saying just now in terms of the switching, because of the lesser tactics. They created these massive vacuums and they totally exploited them. Now, with Ralph, I do agree that he has increasingly looked lost. You do get that sense that since Daniel went, then maybe his main sounding board has gone. Because is it a coincidence that we looked so much more certain last season? There was the clear tactics were there, the clear personnel and what they expected to do there. You've spoken at length in previous podcasts all about the way that the positions, the randomness of some of the positions, particularly along the back line. Now, I never got a sense of that. I don't remember that ever happening last season, that level of switching, and that just causes confusion. You do wonder, has he got somebody to properly support him? We've got, is it 2 goalkeeping coaches on the bench? Now, if you take a step completely emotionally away from it, you look at that setup and you think, that can't be right. That's not the way to play this.
No, I mean, you want to have your assistants to be across a broad range.
Yeah, exactly.
Of skills, don't you? You know, I have a team that I manage where I work, and you want people who have skills that you don't have.
Yes.
So that they can complement what you and the rest of the team don't have. So you have that broad range. And having 2 goalkeepers. So I don't think Kelvin Davis is actually the goalkeeping coach, but he's obviously had a whole career of goalkeeping. And to be honest, you'd have thought with 2 goalkeeping coaches, perhaps the goalkeeping would be a little bit better as well. We've probably got enough to talk about without going into the goalkeepers too much. But yeah, I worry for Ralph, because he did bring in Richard, and I'm not going to try and say his surname, but it begins with a K, who is like a video analyst and one of Ralph's assistants. But I think he needs someone to be there on the pitch and to be that sounding board with him, because
couldn't agree more.
The way it looks from the outside, and obviously you don't know what it's like inside the club, but the way it looks from the outside, it does look like he lacks that person that he can trust completely and will listen to, and that person to challenge your ideas when they're maybe a little bit bonkers, or suggest something. There's nothing better than when someone comes up with a brilliant idea and you can go with it and support it. And I don't think Ralph has got that at that level. And then with Richard Watson, what's his
Dave
name?
Watson.
Dave Watson doesn't seem to provide that either. So it's an interesting.
I mean, there's talk in the media now that the owners are looking to try to get Ralph a director of football. Yeah. Now, we know from some of your previous podcasts and those brilliant interviews that you've been running with Carl Anker, the fact that Ralph has given much, much more freedom and autonomy than is the norm in the Premier League at the moment. And that was clearly an attractive proposition to him in terms of he could have this big project and he had control, jurisdiction over all elements of the club, had that voice on the board. Now, what we might be seeing now is maybe there's a very good reason why that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. There's maybe now a very good reason why they have such big teams covering all different areas in football clubs, because the level of pressure, expectation and the outside influences at football clubs are under such huge degrees of greater scrutiny now than ever before. The pressures are that much bigger that perhaps we are past the days where you can have a good old-fashioned football manager who's got that level of autonomy. So Does he need support? It looks like he certainly does now. Would he welcome it? We obviously don't know. But something needs to change there. And it comes back to exactly what you're saying just now about having the team around you to rally around you, to have those different skill sets and to be able to see the things. There's only so much one person can see when they're trying to take control of everything. And I didn't notice Ralph so much from where we were on Friday, but from what you say, that does make sense. Whenever I glanced over, he was just standing there. Yeah. Brendan Rodgers just looked like he was he could just
having the best time of his life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just sitting back, chilling, watching it all unfold.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And then I suppose the other thing is, at the end of the game when he goes back in, now with the director of football, Ross Wilson's left for Rangers as well, he probably doesn't have any support at that level either. So he really is isolated on both sides. He doesn't have anyone that he can really turn to with football experience in the leadership team.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have anyone who seems to be able to provide what he needs at the next level down. And I've seen there's been some people calling for Ralph to be sacked. I don't think that's a good idea, because I think, let's look at it. Clawpwell got some okay results with Southampton. We finished in the top half of the table. We got to a cup final.
And we were the better team in that cup final and deserved to win it.
Yeah, if only VAR had been in then, eh?
Yes,
So that's, that's been, but the standard of football did go down between Koeman and Puel. Pellegrino was dreadful. Mark Hughes, there was an improvement from Pellegrino, but again, it wasn't particularly good. And Ralph, it really seemed like we've got a man who could do the job on the basis of the way we finished last season, not so much from this season, although you can still see he's trying a different type of tactics, whereas I think kind of Mark Hughes is pretty stuck in the dark ages with tactics. But I think, that's 4 managers now that are struggling with this group of players. Is it, I think, is it the players? Is it not the manager? Would Puel have done better with a better group of players? Would Pellegrino have done better with a better group of players? Would Hughes have done better with a better group of players? If you look back at Hughes' successful time at Stoke, he had a great squad there and had them playing some good football at times as well.
Oh, he really did, yeah.
So I think if we got rid of Ralph, I just don't know who would get in. I think we'd probably do another thing like a Mark Hughes thing, where we'd get someone who'd play a back-to-basics sort of football, which would be less complicated for the players to follow, and perhaps they could grind out some results. But I don't think it's not really the direction that the club wants to be going. Obviously, the direction we're going in at the moment isn't the direction we want to be going either. But I feel like if Ralph had the backing of the backroom staff and the senior management team and some better players, which is quite a big ask, then he could be a really, really good manager. Have your views on Ralph changed this season from last season?
Sadly, they have a little bit. I've been defending Ralph quite a bit when talking to my wife about this, because she keeps on saying as well that he should be going. It's not acceptable. And even my eldest is beginning to question Ralph. I'm very much of the opinion that we do need to coalesce around him. We do need to make sure that the whole club supports him, that he does have that senior management support, that he does. I think he needs somebody in that support role. I think he needs to have that time to work with the players. It's still quite early, I feel personally, and particularly with the new structure around him. I definitely think it's down to the fact that I don't buy into this whole arguments you see sometimes on Twitter about the players don't care, they're gutless, etc. These are professionals who've had to go through a huge amount to get to the level that they're at. In order to work your way through academies to get to be a professional footballer, you've got to be of an incredibly high skill set. You've also got to be somebody who is ruthless, because your mates have been discarded around you, left, right and centre, not making it through, and yet you are the one who's getting it through there. These are good, strong professionals in my view. I can imagine that if you take it onto, we frequently forget that it is a job. It's something that they recognise their privilege to be able to do for their job, but ultimately they are in a profession. If you're in a profession and you're put onto a spotlight where there's millions of people watching you, and if you fail in the workplace and a couple of people around you notice it, you feel pretty bad about yourself. You don't feel great. Can you imagine what it's been like for them? Can you imagine what it's like going home or just going out? You'd be terrified to send foot out of the door. Psychologically, these players are definitely going to be damaged. There's no question about it. And we need to try to find a way of making sure that everybody supports them. And there's proper, real, hard vocal support at the ground. In the second half, it was quite strange because the atmosphere did kind of lighten a little bit. A lot of people left. There was a lot of people leaving after the third goal. A lot of people at half time were either leaving or saying, "Oh, I want to go, but the rain's so awful. I think I'll wait for the rain to ease off. Otherwise, I'd be gone." And then after the sixth and seventh goal, it totally empty. There was nobody within about 4 or 5 rows of us, and it was quite strange that there seemed to be that whole sort of gallows humour. We had points and periods where people were standing, were shouting, "Stand up if you love the Saints," and cheering, and we were all doing that, and we were trying to get behind the team. Yes, there was the atmosphere there that this isn't going well, but I did get the feeling that people were beginning to rally around them, and we clearly do need more of that. Is that going to keep in place? Is that all going to change in terms of massive vocal support for the players if we get rid of the manager? I don't think it will. I think that Ralph has got the ability, he's got the charisma to be able to win the fans back around and the players. I think another change now, I fail to see anybody who's going to be good enough who could come in. And if we went back to a more basics thing, I genuinely don't think that we've got the strong enough players to be able to batten down those hatches, because I haven't seen anything that makes me think that we've really got a defence who can grind that level of result out. The only period in the Leicester match where we looked like we were going to do anything was there was a few minutes where Danny Ings was really, really working, pressing, managed to get a couple of shots where he got one shot away and he looked absolutely gutted that it went off target, and he was really feeling it. I could understand why we needed to try to lock things down for the second half and get the defender on. I did think taking Ings off was a mistake because he was also chasing back, and Maddison was dropping so deep down to the back line to get it, and none of the midfielders were pressing on to Maddison, who totally dominated the game, that if we'd had a striker up there like Ings who would actually chase back, put a bit of pressure on him, I think it could have made a difference. So I was quite surprised when he was taken off, but I do think that I just don't think we've got the players there at the moment. I think we can trust in Ralph's vision over a longer term. I think if we got rid of him now, I think we'd be down without question.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a chance we might go down.
Very strong chance. Very strong chance.
There's a couple of things that you picked up on. There's the kind of the psychology element, and you'd expect Southampton must have kind of psychologists or psychiatrists working with them, looking at the Southampton players and trying to pick them up after such a shock like that. But the other thing about the players as well, about whether they have the quality or not. I mean, we've seen Southampton beat Arsenal and beat Tottenham under Ralph and play well, so we know that they can do it. We've seen them get take Liverpool really close in the both games we've had at St Mary's. With Liverpool, although we've lost them both, we've covered ourselves in a pretty good stead. So we say about the players not being kind of good enough. Is it that we've just got the wrong sort of players for Ralph's tactics? I know when Carl Anker was on the podcast, he was saying that one of the key things about his Red Bull Leipzig team was the Naby Keita, who now warms the bench for Liverpool, as that kind of like dynamic box-to-box midfielder. And you can see that perhaps if Højbjerg was more like that, then Romeo breaks up the play, then Højbjerg carries it up the pitch. But I think we're lacking quite a few things in the player department. The other thing which I think is quite interesting is when we signed Dance on the final moments of the transfer window, I was delighted. So, okay, we've got another centre back. It must be someone that Ralph knows. But Ralph clearly doesn't fancy him that much, does he? Because otherwise he would have been brought in and put in the centre of defence by now. You would have thought, because Vestergaard, Yoshida, Stevens, they've all been tried there, and Dancer got a run out last night, and he was to blame for one of the goals, according to Dave Merrington and Adam.
I've seen that
goal.
Yeah, I've seen that goal, and he was rather statuesque. Whilst Aguero just bolted like he usually does. I mean, it's difficult as well because you are looking there at one of the best strikers the Premier League's ever seen.
Yeah.
So all it takes is one slight little sniff, and he'll get there. Do we have the players who would be able to contain Aguero for 90 minutes every single move he makes? Unlikely. So I'm not too concerned about that one. I do feel that Danso has got this enormous potential, but we need to stop playing him out on the wing back areas.
Yeah.
But he was in the middle of the back three last night. It wasn't interesting putting Højbjerg at left back.
Well, I mean, this makes me worry as well about Jake Vokins, who we've all been told about as a wonderful player coming through from the academy. I think he came on in stoppage time last night.
It was, yeah.
And you think with Ryan Bertrand now going to be out for 3 games, you question why we sold Matt Targett and didn't replace him. You know, clearly the club have thought that, well, Jake Vokins is as good as or better than Matt Targett, so we can afford to let Matt Targett go. But Ralph isn't of the same opinion, because otherwise Jake Vokins would be being played at left back in these times when Bertrand's been injured, and now when he's been suspended. It'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next 3 games, but it doesn't look like Vokins is going to get a sniff.
It is a bit of a peculiar one, because I say I was very surprised when we sold Targett, because I must confess I like Matt Targett. I think he's a good player. I think he's somebody we could have, that he was the type of player you'd be looking for, who's come through the academy, who could have been brought on and taken to the next level by Ralph, because if that's his whole aim about bringing these younger players through and developing them, I mean, all right, Targett's that bit older, but he could have been taken to another level. Now, Vokins, it does worry you when you, like the Bournemouth game, for example, when we've got Cedric there at left back, we're putting Dance on right back, and we've got this whole concern with no real left back.
Yeah.
But this Vokins kid is just never there.
Yeah.
And it was good to see him on the bench last night. But Ralph has been traded on this whole thing of bringing those youth through. And when we've had such an issue with left back all season, it is strange that we're now hitting November and only now he's coming into the match day squad. So clearly he doesn't think he's right.
Yeah, and then maybe this asks another question in terms of the problems that we have across the club. You know, we've talked about the backroom staff, we've talked about the senior management, we've talked about Ralph being isolated, talked about the players. Is the academy now not as good as it was?
Possibly. In terms of, because we've got this big weakness in midfield, we are wholly dependent on the trio. And if there's any issues around that trio, then maybe you might bring Armstrong in. Armstrong is very much he's a good, skillful player. Does he fit the mould of all those positions within the 4-2-2-2 system? He doesn't quite fit into any of those areas there, so he's clearly not for that game. Last season, we started bringing Slattery through. Now, he does look like somebody who is a bit of a run-around midfielder, who will work hard, will put the tackles in, does cover, does do the unseen work, the unsung work. Now, I've been wondering why he hasn't at least been coming into the matchday squad when there's been times when the midfield has been looking that little bit questionable, shall we say, because I think everybody recognises that WardProwse quality player was astonishing last season. The second half of last season under Ralph seems to have gone backwards a bit now. Does he need a break? Does he need to be taken? I still feel that a lot of them need to be taken out of the firing line at the moment. And Slattery, if we can start bringing youngsters through, Slattery might be well worth a go.
Yeah. So speaking about the players that you think that should be taken out of the firing line, I agree that I think James Ward-Prowse needs to have a break. And Ralph needs to say whatever it was that he said to him last season and because if we had that James Ward-Prowse, I don't think we would be in the situation that we are, because he was fantastic towards the end of last season. He was scoring goals. He was causing problems. He was getting Wilfried Zaha sent off. Yeah. You know, it was a James Ward-Prowse that I didn't know existed, and
I don't think
I fell in love with.
Yeah.
I think he needs to be taken out. I also think Højbjerg needs a rest as well.
Definitely.
He's been dreadful for me this season.
Yeah.
Højbjerg, Ward-Prowse, definitely. I think are really, really struggling. Vestergaard, I'm afraid I've made my mind up now. I was at the Saints Man United game where I thought he played really well, but I think that's been the only good game he's had for
He
Saints.
was cracking in that game, wasn't he? Yeah, we were all amazed at just how well he played in that game, and it did look like he turned that corner. But it is curious how somebody who was so dominant in the Bundesliga can come here and just seem to lack the positional awareness, lack the speed is the biggest concern for me with Vestergaard, and his judgment, and somebody that tall still not quite managing to win enough in the air. So all those attributes there, it's a worry, but there clearly is something there though, because he was so strong previously, and he did show in the Manchester United game. I mean, I am a believer that players of this level, they are unbelievably gifted, they are unbelievably skillful and have got the judgment, and I think so much of it is their own confidence. And if Vestergaard is able to show us at least once that he can play that, then he clearly has got that ability. So again, there's something going on there, because he is good enough. I don't buy any argument that he is not a good enough central defender. If he can prove it in one game against, as much as Manchester United have gone off the boil in terms of the level of threat and dominance that they offer, he's still able to do that. So
why can't he do it?
Yeah, I just don't get
every
it.
week. Yeah,
or at least with some sort of level of consistency.
Yeah. I'm just going to bring up one last thing about the game, and then my wife's reaction to the Leicester game before we move on to the Man City game from last night. So I heard someone said to me that Southampton committed 3 fouls in the game against Leicester.
Stat. Yeah.
And then there were no more in the whole rest of the game. And Carl Anker has talked on this podcast about how tactical fouling is a big part of Southampton's method of defending. Obviously, we won't do much defending against Leicester on Friday. But the 3 fouls, do you know what they were?
No.
Ryan Bertrand sending off.
Yeah.
The foul that conceded the free kick that James Maddison scored from.
Yeah.
And Bednarek's
penalty. Oh my God.
Jeez. Perhaps it was good that we only conceded 3 fouls.
Maybe, but it does come back to what Carl was saying about conceding those fouls in the right areas.
Yeah.
And those were 3 fouls in very bad areas.
Yeah.
I must confess to you something which I am quite ashamed of, which is that after the Maddison free kick, we did actually leave at that point.
Did you?
Yeah, at that point. To be fair to the boys, neither of them had actually said, "Can we go, please? This is awful." They would go, "No, we stay, support the team." But at that point, that free kick went in, and you look at it and think, yeah, fair play. That was a brilliant free kick. But the weather was horrific, and there's always the pinch point of getting over the bridge, getting back to trying to find the car, get all the way. So we were just, right, let's just go now. So I didn't actually know that it was the record 9-0 until we got in, because when we got in the car, Evan said, let's put Soda Sport on. I was going, no, I can't. I just want to get home. So at that point, it was, because I think it was about something like the 88th minute where we left. I thought, all right, at least we've avoided the 9.
Yeah,
at least we've avoided the 9. So I didn't know until I got in.
Yeah. Funny enough, the friend I was staying with last night in Southampton is an Ipswich Town fan. And the first thing he said to me when I walked in the door last night was just like, "Welcome to the club." It's just, thanks, mate. So, a little bit of sauce. So my wife's way of offering me commiseration. So she didn't watch the game. She watched Gogglebox with my mum. And there was a story in there, like an awful story about how this lady was having twins and her husband had like brain cancer or something, and then she gave birth to the twins, took them in the car, drove up to the hospital where her husband was having treatment for brain cancer, and then they got one photo and then he died, which is a terribly sad story. And my wife told me this to say, have a bit of perspective, which, okay, fair enough, have a bit of perspective. But I'm like, I've just dealt with my club losing 9-0, and now you've told me about some poor guy who's died on the day his twins are born. Like, this doesn't make me feel any better.
No, not at all.
No. So I don't know if anyone else has got some strange stories about their wives or partners or husbands or brothers or sisters, or, offering commiseration. Do send them into saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com. But yeah, that definitely didn't help me.
No, it wouldn't. All I got when we got home was just because my parents were down staying as well at the same time, and everybody just looked at us as we walked in, and they were just shaking their heads, just going, nothing you can say really.
No.
And I was genuinely in a state of shock, and there were times I was just sort of almost laughing at it, thinking that I just can't believe I've just witnessed that. Saturday morning, I was furious when I woke up. Then it felt more real.
Did you manage to sleep on Friday night?
No, I didn't go to bed until very late. I just could not.
I was lying
didn't even
in bed
bother.
with it all kind of like running through my head over and over again. It was dreadful. It's like, it probably was in shock.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why I worry. I genuinely worry about those players.
Yeah.
Because I think that's national. That's not just national humiliation. That's international humiliation.
Yeah.
There's still memes going on. There's jokes going around.
Yeah.
As people, it must be horrible. And if you look at it on a totally just the objective perspective of Southampton Football Club, whether you care about them or not as human beings, it doesn't matter. Obviously, I do, and I think that we should never lose sense of that human side of this. But from a club perspective, how on earth do we build them back up from that?
Well,
to just some of this level of parity.
I suppose one of the things that we have the advantage here is that Saints have played since that game now. So the fact that we're recording on Wednesday morning and not on Monday morning, for example, does give us a bit of perspective. We lost 3-1 to Manchester City. The first half last night, we didn't register a single shot. I was following it on the Saints website, so I was listening to the commentary.
Yeah.
We were 2-0 down at half-time. We'd completed something like 100 passes compared to Manchester City's 400 passes. We had 20% possession compared to their 80%. But we'd only conceded 2 goals. And I think that was almost like it was the first bit of medicine, was to get through a half of Man City without really, really embarrassing themselves. And in the second half, they did try going forward. And I know this isn't how football works, but they drew the second half with Man City. It finished 3-1. But we got a goal from a corner, from a Jack Stevens header. We scored against Man City. We registered some shots on target. And from the commentary from Adam Blackmore and Dave Merrington, the second half sounded so much more positive.
Definitely.
And I think the advantage of us recording today tells us that, I kind of like wrote in my preparation for this, obviously, so I started the prep for this podcast before last night. Yeah. And I just wrote Man City 27, Saints 0. And it wasn't that bad. And so we can see that there is some little glimmer of improvement. We're out of the League Cup, but I think mentally for the players, they'll be in a better state today than they were yesterday before the game. And is there a glimmer of hope for Saturday?
I don't think there's a glimmer of hope for Saturday, but I do think that there's a glimmer of hope for the Everton game.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to be building towards. I think we need to be realistic about this. All right, Man City have dropped some points. They lost to Wolves. Nobody was expecting that. They had that loss to Crystal Palace last season. Nobody was expecting that. They've lost to Norwich this season. So they are capable of not turning up to their particularly amazingly high standards every single match. But I think this has to be a gradual rebuild. I don't think that any of those teams that have gone to those places and got those results have had to try to build back up from the level of trauma that our players have experienced. Yeah. So I do think that, we need to get through it. The second half, I agree, did sound a lot better from what I heard. And the fact that, Jack Stevens, he's I think is it in his full name, the much maligned Jack Stevens?
Something like that.
Yeah, from a defensive perspective, then there are obviously question marks there, but he's got an excellent goal scoring record for us over the last year or so, and it was a real strong, commanding header, great delivery. Now, it seemed as well that Redmond, Adams could work in hard and were able to push up that a little bit more. Maybe there's something there. Yeah. What my Liverpool sporting mate is convinced we're going to get a draw against Man City, but I think that's just him hoping more than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I don't expect we'll win, but I can see the light at the end of the tunnel from what has been a dreadful time for Southampton Football Club.
I agree, and I think what we're all looking for now is, because quite a bit of the feedback last night where people were getting annoyed that first half was so dreadful. But I agree with you. I think first half was really about just trying to just pick yourself back up off the floor, try to be solid so you don't go in on it and looking at another hiding coming your way. And then they did build and move on in the second half. I think we have to do similar in the next game on Saturday. But I think what we're all looking for is when we go to that Everton match, that they come out at St Mary's in front of all those fans that were there in the last game and they are at it from the off. If they're not at it from the off, then I think that's when we really worry, because that start against Leicester was the worst of the whole. All right, the 90 minutes, the 93 minutes, whatever, was pretty shocking. But the start of it was the issue. And I don't think we can ever reasonably expect that type of start again. If we do get starts of matches like that again, then we've really got to worry.
Simon, I'm looking at the time, and I think we need to wrap this up because we've got a lecture or a workshop to deliver to your students.
You're generously running a workshop for me today. Thank you.
We're going to be looking at getting the university that I work in, Plymouth Marjohn's University, to zero carbon, and your students are going to be helping me out to come up with ideas for that. I did put a little note at the end here that should we talk about Matthew Le Tissier and his climate change denying tweets. I don't know. I feel like we need to stage some sort of intervention, Simon, and perhaps invite Matthew Le Tissier on, and perhaps you could give him, impart some of your knowledge of climate science and environmental sustainability, and basically debunk the website that he shared, because that was
awful.
I don't want to be patronising to people, because I think that's where climate scientists have perhaps in the past sometimes have seemed a little bit aloof. But for people like you and me who work in the kind of the industry of sustainability or whatever, or higher education, the source that he had was not credible,
not at all,
any shape or way. So just in case there's any Saints fans out there who've seen Matthew Le Tissier's tweets about climate change, if you do want to have a chat, Simon is on Twitter. I will copy him into the podcast. He can tell you why the climate science is real and that we do have to do something about it. We will try and speak to Matthew Le Tissier at some point. I very much doubt he'll want to come onto the podcast and talk about climate change. But anyway, if you want to let us know what you thought of this podcast, do get in contact at Saints FC Podcast on Twitter, saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com on the email. Thank you very much, Simon, for joining me once again. It's been a pleasure once again.
And thank you ever so much for the invitation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
So, listeners, cheerio. Let's hope for a slightly more joyous podcast next time. Bye-bye.